Well, during your career, you served as the executive director for CFDA from 91 to 2001. And during that tenure in 1993, you came up with Seventh on Six, which has turned into the iconic New York Fashion Week. Is this true that this idea came to you because you attended a Michael Kors show and the roof fell in on Naomi and Cindy Crawford and all these models that we know and love so much?
Well, basically, that is absolutely the truth. It wasn't necessarily my idea to start with. When I joined the CFDA as executive director, I joined at the end of March in 91, and I was selected and honored with the position on my birthday at a big board meeting with every designer around the table. And then the next 2 weeks was basically Market Week, which is also / Fashion Week. And at that time, if there were 50 fashion shows in New York, they were in 50 different locations. Nobody talked to each other. If your show was downtown or uptown, the east side or the west side, nobody cared who was before and who was after. Nobody cared about making it easier for the buyers and the editors to get from one place to another. If you had a show in the Plaza Hotel, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you had to strike it because somebody was having a bar mitzvah there that night. And if you wanted to do it the next day, you'd have to pay all over again for all the equipment. So it was not cost effective and not effective just in general. And so Michael Kors had a show in an empty lofty space in Chelsea, a concrete raw space. Designers love raw concrete spaces. And when the bass music that went on, as you know, is very loud. And if things aren't nailed down, they tend to shake. Well, this time the ceiling shook and plaster literally came down on the runway onto Naomi, Cindy, Linda, Claudia, Michael always had the best girls in the show, and to this day still has the best models. And they just brushed it off. They paid the big bucks and kept walking. But when the plaster landed in Susie Menkes's lap in the front row from the International Herald Tribune, and Carrie Donovan, who was the fashion critic for the New York Times. And I found out years later that it broke Carrie's Chanel lipstick that she had in her bag. And that was a custom made color for her that they didn't make anymore. So she was furious. And they wrote the next day that we live for fashion. We don't want to die for it. And I said, I think my job description just changed. And it became a mission to find spaces that were convenient, that would organize, centralize, and modernize the shows.
So that's great. You come up with that idea. Now, how do we make that happen? I mean, was it dialing for dollars? Like it's a great idea for him, but how does this come to fruition?
Totally dialing for dollars. You got that right. The industry and the designers, they look like they're extravagant, but they don't want to spend a lot of money on their shows. The biggest chunk of money they spend on is the models, I think. And, so it was my job. I was looking around at every empty space in New York, every empty building, every empty parking lot. Where could we put something like this to happen? But at CFDA, when we talked about wanting to do this and presenting the idea and concept to the membership, people were a little reticent because people don't like doing things necessarily. Every designer wants their own space that's individual to them. And I would say, hey, stupid, it's about the clothes. And so CFDA sent me to Europe, and I went to Paris and to Milan to see the shows. And I came back with full R&D report, and then literally sat down one-on-one with Calvin Klein, with Ralph Lauren, with Donna, with all the top people, and said, you have to get out of these spaces you're in. We have to do this together. And so we got a consensus to do it. We hired somebody to start to produce, a budget of what it would, how do we do this? I had somebody working literally in a closet space in my office in 1412 Broadway. And then I started dialing for dollars because we had to pay for it. And so the first person that came on board was through a friend of mine who was the publisher at Harper's Bazaar at the time. And she said, you have to meet Mark Rodriguez, was the chairman of Evian Water. He was newly installed there, and I met and talked to Mark, and that's when there used to just be Perrier and Evian on the shelves, not 30 different water brands.
Right.
And he was looking to rebrand their water. and take it out of just sports or wherever people were using bottled water. And he said, let's do it. So he said, how much is it? And I had no idea, honestly. I said $100,000. And he said, great, signed on board. The next person that came up, I called Hannah Wintour at Vogue and explained what we were doing, basically explained it over the phone to her. Ultimately then went into the office much later with plans to just share with her everything. But she said, how much money do you need? And I said, I don't know, maybe $500,000. And she said, let me get back to you. And she called Cy Newhouse, her boss, and literally, I think by the end of that day, called me back and said, we'll give you $100,000. So I said, great. So 100 became the target number. After Vogue said, okay, I called the president of Hearst, and I said, Vogue is giving us $100,000. He said, okay, Bazaar will give you $100,000. Then I called the president of Hachette Philippaki for Elle, and he goes, okay, Elle will give you 100. It was, I was every day in the office going, ka-ching, got another one, ka-ching, we got another one.
Wow.
And then Hearst called back and said, could we add Town and Country? And I said, absolutely. And then I called friends at Clairol, because I was trying to find American companies that would be supportive of the American collections and people who benefit from this being organized. So Clairol came on board. I called Jane Hudis, who was Jane Hertzmark. She was an assistant of mine for 6 years early on in her career. She's now the global group president of Estee Lauder. She's probably the most successful woman in the cosmetic industry. She was heading up Prescriptives at the time. I said, Janie, let's do this with your new brand, Prescriptives, and she got $100,000. And then I called. My favorite is I called General Motors. And I said, I was like Michael Moore, can I speak to the president? They said, okay. They send you through to the office. The secretary picks up. And I told her what we're doing. She said, what a good idea. She said, can you send us some information? And ultimately sent them the information. And we got General Motors as a sponsor. And that's how it started. And then we created this village of tents, and put packages together, created a press list of everybody coming, what hotels they were staying at, so designers can send the invitations to them. I mean, we came up with so many things that everybody just takes for granted now, but at the beginning you had to think of how to do that. What works? We had great bags that Carlos Falchi used to make for us, filled with sponsored products for all the editors and press who were coming in from out of town and all over the country. I mean, it was extraordinarily exciting.
Wow. Are you ever shocked at, what it's become? Like, you look at like the evolution of the front row, it used to be, actual buyers, and now it's, celebrities, reality TV stars, influencers. Are you ever shocked about this?
No, I'm not really shocked. I'm impressed by it. It used to be, like you say, it used to be editors that you could recognize, and you'd get, people would like shudder when they'd walk in and go, oh my God, look who's there. It's, it's Anna Wintour, it's Liz Tilberis, and then it was Glenda Bailey, and it's this one and that one. And then it was, and then on the other side of the row was, oh, there's the Neiman's team, there's the Saks team, there's the Bloomingdale's team, there's the Nordstrom team. It was just all the retail, and you recognized everybody. Now, I have no idea who most of them are, and there were always celebrities, who at that time at the beginning were friends of the designer. So it was an organic kind of thing. Years later, you started to realize that designers were paying some celebrities to come and wear their clothes and sit in the front row. But it became such a medium for publicity that if anybody was doing a new TV show, a reality show, or a new movie, their publicists wanted them to be seen at Fashion Week because the pictures were taken, and they went on all the wire services and in all the entertainment magazines that had grown during that time. So it was a great vehicle for that. Politicians would be there in the front row. I mean, any athletes. I mean, I'll never forget a Carolina Herrera show where Venus and Serena came just after playing in the US Open. And
Wow.
I mean, it was monumental. They were the last two to get into the show. We held the show for them. When they snuck in and walked into the venue before the show started, there was a standing ovation in the venue of 1,200 people. It was extraordinary. So there was really special moments like that with celebrities. Barbara Streisand being there for Donna Karan's early shows. It's extraordinary. And many of the housewives that you know so well were always coming to the shows.
They were. I have a question about that in a second. I was also going to ask you, what do you think of like the relationship between like we mentioned Victoria Beckham, who's in this great book,